Okay, so I wanted to talk about motivation versus discipline. Now, people say that, or I should say, lately, motivation used to be like a good word, and somehow it became trendy. I'm not sure who started it, but the mantra kind of has changed. And people say that, well, discipline is more important than motivation. You know, you need discipline, not motivation, right? And I wanted to turn that on its head and ask, maybe motivation is more important than discipline. I wanted to make this video to say to look at it another way, and how perhaps motivation is more important than discipline. And the reason why is because if first of all, motivation is kind of the feeling, right? The fervor. Fervor means the strong sense of doing something. And when you have motivation in the right amount, people always say, well, sometimes I'm not motivated to do it. And I understand that, that reflects kind of when you feel like doing something, right? When you feel the, kind of kind of the willingness to do something. But I would argue that if, if you are motivated, the motivation, if you have a strong enough motivation, I don't think that would be affected in such a small sort of, it wouldn't be affected by a momentary lapse. If you don't feel like doing something, I don't necessarily think that doesn't mean that you would do it, that you wouldn't do it. So maybe the argument I'm making is that perhaps motivation is stronger than that. Your motivation needs to be stronger in that case. So strong that you'll still do what you need to do, even if you don't need to do it. And so in that case, I guess the word motivation is being used, or I guess perhaps you need to be more motivated, perhaps, is the problem. Most people, when they use the word motivated nowadays, they're kind of not saying it fully. Like maybe if you're more motivated, it would be, you wouldn't put it down, so to speak. And so whatever action you're trying to do. Now the discipline, discipline is being able to do something, right? Is being able to do it just out of rote repetition, even if you don't feel like it. And one of the reasons why I think discipline might not be a good thing, for a couple of reasons, actually. The first reason being that discipline, you just because you're disciplined at something doesn't mean you can't give it up. Because what if you convince yourself, you know what, I don't really want to do this or need to do this. Without the motivation, you could stop even if you are disciplined. Just because you're disciplined doesn't mean you won't stop something, right? Nobody is going to do something forever, right? So what causes you to stop, and if you're not motivated, if you don't understand why, motivation is basically like when you're hyped or when you're excited about doing something, right? Like a parent will be motivate their offspring, right, to do something, get them excited, get them to understand. And the problem is, if you just go by discipline, it could be that you don't understand why it is that you're doing something, and you don't also have that feeling attached to it, and so that feeling might be important. And the other thing about discipline is also how discipline can work against you. Because in life, you need to be able to adapt. Okay, you need to be able to sort of change. And if you're too disciplined, you're not going to be as nimble. You're not going to be as able to create new. You're not going to be able to change course, because oftentimes the problem is with discipline. Yeah, it's easy to just do the same thing over and over again, right? But I don't know that's, most things in life, it's not like that. You have to change, you have to adapt, you have to change the strategy, you have to, you can't just do one thing over and over again, like forever. most of the time, there's a certain degree of, you have to kind of invent something new that wasn't there. And so how does discipline play in that? Because discipline is something that you just do sort of, and perhaps the discipline could be to just do it. And I guess you could argue that way, that maybe discipline just means doing it, or the ability to just change or do. But I don't see that as, that's normally not how discipline is used, or how we think of discipline. Because with discipline, mostly it's doing something that you're already familiar with and just doing it every time and not thinking about it. Just kind of doing it automatically, even if you don't feel like it. But maybe that's a weakness, because sometimes, your brain, and even your brain understands this, too much of one thing is not good, right? If you do too much exercise, you could hurt yourself, right? If you do, whatever it is, too much of anything is not necessarily a good thing. And your brain is actually designed to, and I've talked about this in other videos, it's designed to distract you, actually. Distraction is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's actually meant to protect you. It's a protection mechanism. So that's the other thing. Do you really want to be so disciplined that you can't adapt? Protection mechanism. Do you really want to be so disciplined that you become laser focused, and then you miss out on other opportunities that you could have had? And it's just not most things in life actually require lots of changes. And so, discipline can work against you. And sometimes the feeling of motivation might be more important than the discipline, because it might not be a good thing to just be go, 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 go and never stop. That's what I'm saying. So that's what I'm saying. So sometimes it's well, I don't feel like doing it. Yeah, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It could be, and like I said, it's a little hard, because obviously motivation, we're kind of using it in different senses. Kind of the greater form of motivation being that, you're motivated, and nothing can stop you. And then kind of the lesser form of motivation, which is, that motivation that you feel on a day-to-day basis, and whether you're going to do something or not. But then what I would argue is that sometimes, obviously this is what's going to carry you through. And actually, I would say the motivation is what causes the discipline, perhaps. So see, the words they're not so rigidly separate. There's a connection to it, and there's also a disconnection to it. And then the lesser motivation is where, you don't feel like it, right? I don't feel like doing it, and I kind of, I'm not going to do it today. And this is how most people use the sense, and this is why people don't like motivation. But I would argue, if your motivation is great enough, you should be able to accomplish what you want to accomplish without, you should be able to accomplish what you want to accomplish and not have to lose the discipline. So they're not exclusive. But I would say that perhaps motivation, I might say motivation is more important than discipline, because you need to be nimble. You need to be able to change directions. And like I said on that was my second reason. And the first reason was, what was the first reason I gave? The discipline is something that is not, the brain is designed to not be disciplined, so to speak. In other words, we're supposed to kind of stop doing something. We're supposed to take breaks periodically or every once in a while. And I find, in my view, I don't think it's humanly, yes, you can be motivated if you are doing something repetitive. But when you're doing something, when it's constantly work, everyone gets tired at some point. And so is it really astute to just always be working and never stop? And it's yes, you can do that, but you still need those moments, those breaks, those moments of where you think to yourself. And so I find in the moments where I have been sort of creating and inventing and doing things at an advanced level, I've noticed that I do it in spurts. And so I'll just feel like, I'll feel like doing something, and then I'll do it. I might spend 4 weeks, all in, maybe a month, maybe a little more, and then I'll have to stop. Like literally, I mean, it consumes you. You can't, like, I dare anybody to do intense sort of intellectual or even physical, but especially intellectual pursuits, and then and do it not, at some point you want to rest a little bit. Your mind just wants to stop, even doing it like that. And I would argue that this is why motivation, something inside of you that makes you want to do something, will carry you through even if you take breaks and you're not as disciplined as you should be. Does that make sense? And so that's why motivation is more important, because the motivation is the feeling that helps you, or not even the feeling, it could just be the thought. You don't even have to feel it. That's the thing. It could just be the thought of understanding, hey, this is a greater cause. That's what motivation is. Having motivation is being able to move yourself in a direction. And discipline, the problem with discipline, and the last reason I was going to say is, with discipline, you can't, you can't find, let's say you want to, if you're just doing something all the time, and like I said, in life, very few things are accomplished just by doing the same thing over and over again forever. Like, that's simplistic. That's completely simple-minded. That's just not how life works. And so, in a sense, it's like discipline cannot carry you through because life is not that simple for most people. In most disciplines, I would say. It requires completely reinventing yourself every single time. So when you're reinventing yourself, there are moments of breaks. There are moments where you have to start over and you have to come up with new ideas, and it's a weird process where it's not a simple matter of, well, I can just go ahead and just do it, and maybe I guess the issue is whether you feel like doing it or not. But I think that feeling and the rest period is part of it's part of the creation process. And so so I guess what I mean is that when you are creating, it's like part of the process is to slow down, and part of the process is to create new things. But when you do that, when you create new things, it requires reinventing yourself. And so you're not going to be in that disciplined state all the time. And so what's going to bring you back? I mean, I fear that if you don't have motivation, or if you don't think motivation is important, you think discipline is too important, you're just going to focus on the process of doing something in a certain way or certain expectations, and you're not going to innovate as much. That's the problem. You're not going to be as nimble to come up with new ideas and to realize sometimes you need to slow down, or it's not even about slowing down. Sometimes you need to completely reinvent what you're doing. And it might not, and it's not even about chasing trends. I'm talking about creating new trends. And that's when it's time to move on, right? When you finish a job, usually you do something and then the project finishes and then it's, on to the next thing. And so this is where I believe motivation is what will carry you through. Motivation is more important than discipline, because from my experience, I feel like there's a strong case to say that motivation is that feeling, or at least it doesn't even have to be a feeling. It could just be the understanding that, hey, you know what? I've got to do this. I'm going to do this. And this is why I'm going to do this. And here is my vision. And here is the overall plan. And understanding that and having that, that's the motivation. That's what motivates me. That's what gets me to do something. So in other words, the discipline gets you to do something without thinking about it, by doing it, through muscle memory, right? But the motivation is where your ideas and brains gets you to do it. Does that make sense? And so they both accomplish the same thing. And I think motivation is more important because it's not about always doing something. If it's because, I guess what I'm saying is, feeling like you don't want to do something is part of the process. And so that means is that sometimes that is how the innovations happen. You're supposed to feel like you don't want to do something, and you're supposed to stop and possibly change during those periods. And so in a way, it's part of the process. So to eliminate that, or to say that motivation is bad, you should just always ignore it. Always ignore the urge to slow down. Always ignore. Always be disciplined, and don't let that feeling that, oh, you know what, I don't feel like doing it today. Don't let that take over. That's wrong, I would think. That could be wrong, because you know what? Maybe you need that rest. That rest is the moment where you might come up with that new creation. You might come up with the next great idea. That moment of reverie, that moment of escape could very well be. And so all this talk of, well, you know what? Discipline is more important than motivation. You know what? Maybe motivation is more important than discipline. Motivation is more important than discipline. Or motivation, not discipline, right? Like maybe that is. And that has been from my experience, right? And how important it is to be able to create, right? It doesn't, I mean, at the end of the day, the motivation could very well be more important also, because it helps you to focus more, right? Because what's the point of being disciplined if you don't really know where you're going? And now I know it's kind of weird, because you can see how a lot of different ways of, we can use the word discipline and motivation in different ways, and you can mean it in different senses. And so, but normally the way people use it is the way, in this case, in this context, is that the discipline is what you use to get yourself to do something automatically, even if you don't feel like it. And the motivation is like, well, I'm motivated. But I would argue, you'll do it when you feel like it, and if you don't feel like it, you might back down. But I would argue that, there's kind of a different way of looking at motivation. The greater motivation being where the greater overarching motivation that never goes away, right? It always stays even when you're resting. And then there's the lesser motivation, which is that day-to-day that most people are thinking about, where you slow down, and so you give in. And my point is that sometimes, a lot of times, that is an effective way to grow. So even if you don't feel like doing something 100%, like as long as you make progress, even though it'll take you a little longer, but you'll still make progress. So it's not necessarily even a bad thing. Even if you just go by motivation, you'll still get to the finish line. And in fact, you might even come up with better ideas, and it might actually be the best way to do it, and might even be more efficient than the disciplinarian way of doing it, because, as I said, you're able to adapt. And I actually believe, and I've talked about this in other videos, where you actually need that rest. And our brain actually is not designed to just be like a robot, because actually that would hurt us. Like a lot of things in life, like nothing lasts forever. Nothing just keeps going forever. It's at some point you need to rest. At some point you need to sleep. At some point you need to. So all of that, in some ways, it's actually nonsense, because the whole concept of discipline, like it's broken up by sleep and eating and all that anyway. So like even the whole idea of discipline being upheld over everything, not necessarily. The discipline might actually hurt you more than it helps you. And so it's better to just be motivated. And motivation could be more important, because with motivation, if you don't feel like it, that's okay. But if you do feel like it, and you'll still accomplish the goal. And then not only that, but if you are motivated, you could still be so motivated that you never fail. In other words, the motivation, that feeling, it might not go away ever. Like who says that it's going to go away, right? Like how often do people have fervor and feelings, right? When people are in love, it doesn't go away ever, right? And do people who are in love, do they fall in love and then they fall out of love the next day and then one day they're not? That's not how it works. And so it's even a misunderstanding of what motivation is. And so therefore, it doesn't go away. So if your motivation is strong enough, not only will it allow you to have a level of discipline, It can enhance discipline, but you don't even need discipline because it's okay. Whoa. It's okay to not be disciplined anyway. You don't want to be disciplined anyway all the time. And so the motivation becomes more powerful, a more powerful force, and I think more important force than the other. Trying to fix this. I don't know what happened here. Okay, there we go. So the motivation, I would say, that's going to carry you through. And motivation is that feeling. And people keep saying, well, sometimes you don't feel like it. Well, you know what? Maybe find a cause or a reason to always feel like it. So maybe instead of saying, oh, well, just be disciplined, which would be a bad thing and would make you less creative, just say, if the ability to always want to do something is the problem, well, then make yourself always want to be motivated. Make that the solution. Instead of saying, well, I'm just going to be disciplined, because the disciplined, you're basically ignoring the feeling. You're just doing something for no reason, or you're just doing it because even when you don't feel like it. And so maybe change the mindset. And I mean, why is it so hard to say that you can, how about you just always feel like it, right? And so even if you don't, I know that you don't always feel like it, but there are certain instances in life where something can be so powerful, it can be such a powerful draw that you always do it. Do you know what I mean? Like, that is possible too. And so in that case, I would encourage you to think about this and what do you think? I think that motivation, I could make the argument, as I just did, that I think motivation is more important than discipline. And I find that in my work that I've created, it hasn't always been, it's not necessarily a good thing to always just do the same thing over and over. And to, if I don't feel like it, it's okay to not do it when you don't feel like it. And it's not necessarily going to stop you, and you can still grow, right? And maybe in some ways it's meant to be, because that's where the discoveries happen. Because if you always just do the same thing, well, then you're not going to change. You're not going to change as much. And I feel like the ability to stop is something that the brain does, and it's also something that happens, that it's meant to happen, so to speak. So in a way, they're interconnected, right? It's not to say that I don't value discipline. I do, but I think the motivation could very well be the thing. That carries you through, and is more important to have. Like, maybe, you know what? No, you need motivation more than discipline, because if you're just disciplined, you might forget why you're disciplined. But if you're motivated, and you create a greater motivation, a higher attachment, a higher level of motivation, you're not going to forget why you're doing what you're doing. So eventually, you will get to where you're trying to go. So there we go. Thank you all for watching.